Hello, with me today is Jenny Olivia Johnson. She is a composer, sound artist, musicologist, and associate professor of music at Wellesley College. Her music has been described as gorgeous, ominous, and hypnotic by the Boston Globe, and stunning in its simplicity and power by the Boston Musical Intelligencer, bold by the LA Times, and iridescent, shimmering, and evocative by Time Out New York. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Jenny's interactive sound installations have been exhibited at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in DC. She's working on some other installation projects right now, and I think I'll let her talk about that and some of the really cool stuff that she's doing to do with 1990s New York City and cheesy 80s love song. I definitely want to hear more about this. So Jenny, Polyphony Voices of New Mexico is presenting the world premiere of your work, The Many Poems She Learned as a Child, which is scored for upper voice choir, electronics, and smartphones. In our upcoming Awakenings Project concerts, Music is Diversity, this Thursday in Santa Fe, March 31st, and this Saturday, April 2nd at 5 o'clock at the Cathedral of St. John. So share a little bit about yourself, what you're up to these days, and just a little bit of your background and kind of about the writing of this particular work and how you came upon this text.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for involving me in this project. It's been very moving. I guess I'll start actually with the writing of this piece, which took place last fall. I'm in Los Angeles this year for a lot of reasons, one of which has to do with the passing of my father. And so it was a unique opportunity to be asked to write a piece to celebrate the life of somebody who lived a very long, rich, full, joyful life, and to honor them and to think about what it means to honor somebody who is no longer with us in a way that is celebratory and also, appropriately solemn and sort of spiritually engaging and meditative. These are kind of stances that I've been trying to take in my own life at the moment. So the writing of this piece really was a very spiritual exercise where I learned as much as I could about Rebecca Jennings, the woman that we're honoring with this piece, the mother of Phyllis Kennedy, who has so generously contributed to the commission of this work. And for me, I read the obituary many times, and I was struck in particular by how Rebecca Jennings was a lover of poetry, which I am as well, and of games like crossword puzzles and the game show Wheel of Fortune, which I also love. So I was like, whenever I write a piece, I like to feel find myself in it in some ways, just so I can respond to it emotionally. And those were two details that I lit upon. And I thought, wow, so okay, I'm going to kind of start first with the poetry aspect. And one of the poems that was mentioned in the obituary was George Cooper's Come Little Leaves, which is this beautiful sort of meditative poem on the seasons and on life. And so I started with those words, and I just kind of went to the keyboard and sang and came up with the initial material that way. I also experienced synesthesia. So for me, when I'm writing music, I'm always thinking about color and texture. And the poem has all these beautiful references to gold and other sorts of colors of fall and winter. And so I chose keys and chords that kind of related to my feelings of those chords and the feeling of mourning and grieving in a way that's beautiful and solemn. And so that was kind of my initial approach. And then I kept thinking about the Wheel of Fortune piece too, because I'm obsessed with crossword puzzles, and I'm obsessed with the sounds of game shows, like the kind of tingling and ringing and all of the excited kinds of stingers that are a part of watching that kind of TV. And it's for me, it's rooted in my childhood, the 1980s. So I kept thinking about that. And then I'm also an avid reader of the tarot. I'm very interested in tarot cards and games and their ancient sort of antecedents. And so I was thinking in particular about the Wheel of Fortune. And then I lit upon the idea that, there's a very important card in the tarot, the Wheel of Fortune card, number 10 in the major arcana, which involves the idea that everything is, purportedly about chance and fate, and also about the turning of the wheel, the turning of the seasons, the turning of events in our lives. And to the extent that we have any control over that, the Wheel of Fortune teaches us to kind of sit with the idea that many, many things are going to befall us and happen to us in life. and they're going to have all kinds of valences, but it's always going to keep changing and turning. And I think you can find happiness in realizing that. And so I wanted to involve the Wheel of Fortune somehow. And so as I was writing the piece, I kept thinking about the sounds, and I knew I wanted to incorporate those joyful sounds and those kinds of very material memories for me, and perhaps for this person I'm honoring, in the piece. And my interest in sound installation is also an interest in what happens when you combine performances, performed concert pieces and sound installation kinds of aspects, such as the immersivity and interactivity of walking into a sound installation. And I've built several of those that involve sensors and the audience being there, having a lot to do with how the piece actually unfolds and is experienced. So I really wanted to combine those elements. I was like, what if the audience, and I assumed the spaces that this piece was going to be performed in were going to be at resonant churches, cathedrals. And I thought, what if the audience had some way to also generate sound and immerse themselves in sound? So then I thought about having a soundtrack with these Wheel of Fortune sounds and some harmonic material related to the choir's work, sort of immersed in the audience, maybe with their phones. And I've done a few pieces like this before where I've had audiences play material from their smartphones, this ubiquitous object that we're all carrying with us, and that it could sort of literally, occupy the space and give the audience a sense that they're not only a part of this, but they're generating sound, and then they're experiencing sound. And I wanted everybody to feel connected in that way. So that's a very long-winded way of describing how I approached this piece and how I wrote it. And I'm excited to see what the result is going to be. My hope too is that the phones will glow. I love the idea of visual elements as well, again, because of my synesthesia. So I'm hoping that the lights of everybody's phones might ignite the space with a feeling of candlelight and vigil and honor.
I love that. That idea of the light emitting from their phones as being something that's part of the remembrance and part of the whole experience, the immersive experience. I'm very much looking forward to not only hearing the sounds, because this is not something you can rehearse as a conductor. You can't say, right, okay, 45 of you or 100 of you put your smartphones on. So we don't really have a sense as a choir yet what that's going to really feel like to collaborate in that way. But I'm very excited about the possibilities, certainly. Cool. You wrote this piece during the pandemic. The pandemic has been difficult and challenging for all of us on so many different levels. How did the pandemic potentially inform or affect your writing?
It really impacted the approach I took to several pieces that I had to write, commissions that I got right before March of 2020. By the time I was getting into them in the middle of the pandemic during lockdown, they became spaces for me to look way back in some cases. So this piece was certainly for me a feeling of, what does it mean to grieve and to look back on memories and to memorialize others? And then I also wrote another piece for choir and electronics that's actually being premiered this same week by Illuminarts Miami and Variant 6, which was a real look back into early childhood memories. And so I definitely attribute that to what the pandemic has wrought, for me at least, was this sudden space for just sitting and thinking, which I always appreciate and love time to myself and quiet time. But this was like, magnified immensely, that I was just kind of like alone with my thoughts a lot. I was teaching online. I would try to leave the house to go on walks or go skiing or something. But, other than that, I was in my house. And so I think that that's what it invited for me, was that music became a space for trying to reconcile certain things from the past or just revisit. And then it also, again, became, it's always been a spiritual practice for me to write music, but I think that became magnified too, is that I really felt like I was almost method acting my way into pieces, to the extent that for one of the pieces I was writing, which was about navigating dark spaces, I was like, okay, for this week, I'm just going to live by candlelight. I'm going to turn off all my electricity and just like experience something in a deep way, because the pandemic allowed me to do that. I was living this very out of time sort of existence. And so I think, I've always reminisced in my music, but it's just been intensified. I think another thing that it's changed for me is thinking about how, certainly during the pandemic and maybe going forward, what does it mean to share music online or sort of out of space and time that we're used to as musicians. And that's affected this big opera project that I'm currently finishing. I've been writing this opera for 21 years off and on since you and I met, Maxine, the days at MSM. And I'm finally finishing it, and I'm calling it a headphones opera, not because I don't want it to be performed live, I do, but I'm thinking of it just as another kind of object altogether, as an album that you're supposed to listen to in the intimate, quiet space of your own. And I therefore mixed it very carefully so that it was a whole world inside of headphones. And I'm actually also thinking of making a video game version of it. Another lockdown development. I've always been interested in video games, but I've become very obsessed with sound in video games. I've been teaching about that subject at Wellesley with my colleague Gurminder Bogle, who's a scholar of Debussy and Ravel, and also now video game music. So that's been a whole development. And I'm like, wow, I kind of want to make this I think playing video games can be very intimate, especially the kind of game I'm envisioning, which is like an RPG adventure game where you're wandering around, in this case, New York City in the 90s, trying to accomplish various tasks, and then the opera is kind of happening around you. So I think that's absolutely a lockdown result, is just thinking about how to create immersivity and intensity for people that might be alone, just simply connected through the internet. What can that mean? What does that index? Probably lots of things.
And that crossroads of macro living and micro living all at once, and how life is in the details, yes, but when you're given this ginormous swath of time in front of you that you actually don't really know when the end of it is, you are just walking through this great abyss of darkness and you have absolutely no sense where you're going necessarily. And you just live in the moment, but at the same time living in the past and wanting to live in the future.
Exactly. That's a perfect encapsulation. And one of the retro video games I was playing a lot is King's Quest IV: The Perils of Rosella, which was a PC game where there's a scene where Rosella, you have a lantern and you go into this cave, and you play it over and over, and everybody dies a lot at first because there's a huge chasm in the cave and you don't know where it is. You have to figure out exactly in the darkness where to find it. And all you are is this circle of light and this little sprite wandering in darkness. And I was like, this is exactly how I feel. And so I think that contributed to the Variant 6 piece and the darkness, and trying to uncover the maps of the past that are shrouded in darkness. And then also this feeling of wanting to create some kind of immersive experience in video gaming, with the idea that you never know where you're going. You don't know which way to go or what to get first, or how to proceed. And that's, I think, where we all are, which opens up many opportunities, but it's
Sure
been
does.
crazy.
Part of your piece, The Many Poems She Learned as a Child, takes you through 5 different movements called cantos, and each of the movements are titled Summer, Autumn, The Blue Room / The Wheel of Fortune, Winter, and Spring. Can you talk a little bit about those cantos?
Yeah, of course. It would seem that it's a 4 seasons piece, right? Except there's 5, and the middle one doesn't fit. It's the Blue Room. And that was sort of something that I lit upon as very much related to this idea of wandering and not knowing, and what the Wheel of Fortune teaches us about. You have no idea what's happening next, what's going to happen to you. And so I thought about the Blue Room kind of as a place where the TV's flickering and you're watching Wheel of Fortune and you're back into a memory. And what does that memory mean? And so this is where I kind of projected a lot of my own experiences into the piece, because the seasons are clear, they're linear. You're going to go from one to the next, they're sequential. The Blue Room kind of interrupts that and puts you in this tumble, which is a very aleatoric section for the choir. They're instructed to just sing a few different lines on a select number of possible notes in a triad, or maybe outside of it if they feel there's kind of 2 competing triads in that section, and they can just find themselves in it or lose themselves in it. And so for me, that's a kind of Blue Room space. Blue is a very important color for me and sort of my synesthetic pantheon of relaxation, but also mystery, and what's called the oceanic feeling in Freud's writing. That feeling of being completely, you have to let go and let yourself into a kind of spiritual plane where you don't know what's going to happen next, or how you might react. And so I wanted to kind of interrupt that sequence with this kind of looming, and for me, it's in the shape of a circle, like the Wheel of Fortune, a blue circle, a blue room, a blue space where, it's out of time. And that's kind of an obsession with mine. It's in my opera too. The opera is called The Aftertime, and it's really about being in the place where there is no time, which is the place of mourning and remembrance. And accepting the lessons of the Wheel of Fortune. And then we come back into winter, which is my favorite season, actually, even though it's, you know, poetically supposed to be the season of death and destruction and sleep. As an avid skier and lover of the outdoors, snowy mountains, that was kind of, I wanted to emerge from the Blue Room into what to me feels like a very safe space of like, except like winter for me is like, it's a time of rest and respite and thinking and contemplation. And then we sort of move into spring, which actually for me is a very ambivalent season. Things are starting to grow, but it's a hard season. You know, things are trying to crack through the ice and rebuild themselves. And that's where we end, was, you know, what happens next.
And this particular spring, I feel like as an arts organization and as fellow arts organizations, as we all sort of talk amongst ourselves, and we're like, yeah, it's great, but it's really hard to kind of come out of this pandemic, to sort of crack through the place where we all have been for the last 2 years, and to create and to continue to invite people into that creative space. And yeah.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, but time.
Exactly.
Well,
I feel the same
Jenny,
way.
I can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat with us about your piece and about your work. And I know that the choir is very much looking forward to giving the premiere on Thursday in Santa Fe and repeating that performance here in Albuquerque on Saturday. Thanks again. This has been marvelous.
I'm so excited. Thank you.